Boccaccio's Decameron, first day, fourth story. Let me start with the introductory because it is short. No sooner did Philomena stop talking, having reached the end of her tale, than Dioneo, who was sitting next to her and already knew it was his turn to address them because of the order in which they had been speaking, began in the following manner, without awaiting further instruction from the queen. Now, one thing you're going to find about Dioneo is he makes his own rules, and he's not bothered by convention when it comes to what he says or does. Sweet ladies, if I have properly understood your unanimous intention, we are here in order to bring pleasure to each other with our storytelling. I therefore contend that each must be allowed, as our queen agreed just now that we might, to tell whatever story we think most likely to amuse. So having heard now how Abraham's soul was saved through the good advice of Jehoneh de Chevigny, and how Melchizedek employed his wisdom in defending his riches from the wily maneuvers of Saladin, I intend, without fear of your disapproval, to give you a brief account of the clever way in which a monk saved his body from very severe punishment. In Lunigiana, which is not all that far from where we are now, there is a monastery that once had a greater supply of monks and of saintliness than it nowadays has. And in it there was a young monk whose freshness and vitality neither fasts nor vigils could impair. One day about noon, when all the other monks were asleep, he chanced to be taking a solitary stroll around the walls of the monastery, which lay in a very lonely spot, when his eyes came to rest on a strikingly beautiful girl, perhaps some local farmhand's daughter, who was going about the fields collecting wild herbs. No sooner did he see her than he was fiercely assailed by carnal desire. He went up to her and engaged her in conversation, passing from subject to subject, till he came to an understanding with her and took her back to his cell, making sure that no one was watching. But being carried away by the rigor of his passion, he threw all caution to the winds. And whilst he was cavorting with the girl, the abbot, who happened to have risen from his siesta and was quietly walking past the monk's cell, heard the racket that the pair were creating. So that he might recognize the voices, he crept softly up to the door of the cell, stood there listening, and came to the definite conclusion that one of the voices was a woman's. His first impulse was to order the door to be opened, but he then decided to deal with the matter differently and returned to his room, where he waited for the monk to come out. The monk, albeit he had taken the greatest of pleasure and delight in the young woman's company, suspected nonetheless that something was amiss, for it seemed to him that he could hear the shuffling of feet in the corridor. He had therefore applied his eye to a tiny aperture, from which he had obtained an excellent view of the abbot standing there listening. He was thus well aware that the abbot had had the opportunity of knowing that the girl was in the cell, and consequently he was very worried, for he knew he would be punished severely on account of all this. But without betraying his anxiety to the girl, he quickly ran his mind over various expedients to see if he could chance upon one that might do him some good, and hit upon a novel piece of mischief, which would have precisely the effect he was seeking. Pretending to the girl that he thought that they had spent sufficient time together, he said to her, "I am just going to go find a way of letting you out of here without your being seen. So stay here and make no sound till I return." He then emerged from his cell, and having locked the door, went straight to the abbot's room and handed him his key, this being the usual practice whenever any monk was going out. Then, without so much as batting an eyelid, he said, "Sir, this morning I was not able to bring in all the faggots that were cut for me, so, with your permission, I should like to go to the wood and have them brought in." The abbot, thinking that the monk knew nothing of the fact that he had seen him, was glad of the chance to find out more about the offense he had committed, and he gladly accepted the key, gave him his ready permission. After watching the monk go away, he began to consider whether it would be better for him to open the man's cell in the presence of all the monks and let them bear witness to his disgrace, so that they would have no reason to complain against him later when he punished the fellow, or first to hear the girl's account of the affair. On reflecting that she might be a reputable woman or the daughter of some man of influence, not wishing to make the mistake of putting such a lady to shame by displaying her to all of the monks, he decided he would first go and see who she was and then make up his mind. So he quietly made his way to the cell, opened the door, entered, and locked the door behind him. When she saw the abbot coming in, the girl was terrified out of her wits and began to weep for shame. Master Abbot, having looked her up and down and saw that she was a nice, comely wench, and despite his years, he was promptly filled with fleshly cravings, no less intense than those his young monk had experienced. And he began to say to himself, well, why not enjoy myself a little when I have the opportunity? After all, I can have my fill of sorrow and afflictions whenever I like. This is a fine-looking wench, and not a living soul knows that she is here. If I can persuade her to play my game, I see no reason why I shouldn't do it. Who is there to know? No one will ever find out, and a sin that's hidden is half forgiven. I may never get another chance as good as this. It's always a good idea, in my opinion, to accept any gift that the good Lord places in our path. Having said all this to himself and completely reversed his original intention in going there, he went up to the girl and gently began to console her and tell her not to cry. One subject led to another, and eventually he came round to explaining what he had in mind. The girl, who was not exactly made of iron or of flint, fell in very readily with the abbot's wishes. He took her in his arms and kissed her a few times, and lowered himself onto the monk's little bed. But out of regard, perhaps, for the weight of his reverend person and the tender age of the girl, and not wishing to do her any injury, he settled down beneath her instead of lying on top, and in this way he sported with her at considerable length. So, let's just say the abbot is not a fan of the missionary position. Meanwhile, the monk, who had only pretended to go to the wood and had hidden himself in the corridor, and when he saw the abbot entering the cell by himself, he felt quite reassured, being convinced that everything was proceeding according to plan. And when he perceived that the abbot had locked himself in, he was left in no doubt whatsoever. Emerging from his hiding place, he quietly crept up to the chink in the wall, through which he saw and heard all that the abbot was doing and saying. The abbot, deciding he had spent enough time with the girl, locked her in the cell and returned to his room. And after a while, hearing the monk, and supposing he had just returned from the wood, he determined to give him a jolly good scolding and have him locked up, and so that he alone would possess the prize they had captured. So he sent for the monk, put on a stern face, reprimanded him most severely, and ordered him to be locked in the punishment cell. Without hesitation for a moment, the monk replied, "Sir, I have not yet been long enough in the order of Saint Benedict to have had a chance of acquainting myself with all its special features, and you had failed until just now to show me that the monks have women to support, as well as fasts and vigils. But now that you have pointed this out, I promise that if you will forgive me just this once, I will never again commit the same error. On the contrary, I shall always follow your good example." The abbot, who was no fool, quickly realized that the monk had outwitted him, and moreover, seen what he had done. Being tarred with the same brush, he was loath to inflict upon the monk a punishment of which he himself was no less deserving. So he pardoned the monk and swore him to secrecy concerning what he had seen. Then they slipped the girl out unobtrusively and we can only assume that they afterwards brought her back at regular intervals. Now, Boccaccio has taken aim at the church hierarchy, and let's just say the monks are no less vulnerable targets. In this case, though, one of the things he's very kind of clear here is he's very specific about the location of the monastery and its order. It's a Benedictine monastery. There's probably not a heck of a lot of Benedictine monasteries in this neighborhood, so he's talking about a very specific place, and there would be only one abbot, so he's talking, the story is about somebody very specific, although who it is I do not know. But anyway, you're going to find that Dioneo gets a little more raunchy than the rest of the people telling stories. Here he is in the fourth story. I think that Boccaccio said, well, if there's any censors or anybody who might think about banning the book, they'll probably only read the first stories, and after that I can basically write what I want. And basically, he does. I hope you've enjoyed this story. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.